The letter trembled in Ophelia Preston's scarred hands as she read the words that had haunted her since childhood. No man would ever want a woman so disfigured, so broken, so utterly unmarriageable. But desperation had driven her to answer the advertisement for a mail-order bride anyway. And now she stood on the dusty platform of Eldorado Canyon, Nevada in the sweltering summer of 1878, waiting for a man who would surely reject her the moment he saw her face. The train's whistle faded into the distance, leaving her alone with two battered trunks and a heart that beat with equal measures of hope and dread. The burned scars that covered the left side of her face and neck, souvenirs from a kitchen fire when she was 8 years old, had always marked her as different. In Boston, where she had grown up in her aunt's boarding house, the other girls had whispered behind their hands about poor Ophelia, the spinster who would never know love. At 23, she had finally accepted that truth until she saw the advertisement. The Nevada sun beat down mercilessly, and Ophelia adjusted her bonnet to shield as much of her face as possible. She had deliberately sent an old photograph to Lucas Kincaid, one taken before the accident, when her face had been unblemished and her future full of promise. It was a deception that now sat like lead in her stomach, but her aunt had insisted. "Get yourself out west first," Aunt Margaret had said. "Once he sees your good qualities, the scars will not matter so much." Ophelia was not so certain. The main street of Eldorado Canyon stretched before her, a collection of weathered wooden buildings that seemed to shimmer in the heat. A saloon, a general store, a blacksmith's forge, and various other establishments lined the dusty road. Men in worn denim and dusty boots moved about their business, and a few women in calico dresses hurried along the wooden walkways. It was so different from Boston, so raw and unpolished, that Ophelia felt as though she had stepped into another world entirely. "Miss Preston." The voice was deep and hesitant, and Ophelia turned to see a man approaching from across the street. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. His eyes were the color of a summer storm, gray-blue and cautious. He wore the typical garb of a working cowboy: denim trousers, a worn cotton shirt, scuffed boots, and a hat that had seen better days. He moved with the easy grace of a man comfortable in his own skin, but there was something tentative in his approach. This was Lucas Kincaid, the man who had advertised for a wife. Ophelia's breath caught in her throat. He was handsome, more handsome than she had dared imagine, which made what was about to happen all the more painful. She turned to face him fully, lifting her chin with the dignity her aunt had drilled into her, letting him see exactly what he was getting. Lucas stopped a few feet away, his eyes sweeping over her face. She watched for the familiar reactions, the widening of the eyes, the barely concealed flinch, the struggle to maintain politeness while disappointment flooded through. She had seen it 1,000 times before, but Lucas Kincaid did none of those things. Instead, he removed his hat and held it against his chest, and his storm-gray eyes met hers with an intensity that made her heart skip. "Miss Preston," he said again, and there was something like wonder in his voice. "You came." Ophelia's hands tightened on her reticule. "Mr. Kincaid," she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "I apologize for the deception. The photograph I sent was old, taken before my accident. I understand if you wish to send me back on the next train. I have enough money for passage, and I will not hold you to any promise you made." She had rehearsed these words 100 times during the long journey west, trying to maintain some shred of dignity for the inevitable rejection. Lucas's brow furrowed. "Send you back? Why would I send you back?" "Because I am not what you expected," Ophelia said, gesturing toward her scarred face. Because I am damaged goods, as my aunt's neighbors used to say. Because no man wants a wife who frightens children when they see her." The words came out more bitterly than she intended, years of hurt spilling over despite her best efforts to remain composed. Something shifted in Lucas's expression, a flash of pain that seemed to mirror her own. He took a step closer, and Ophelia fought the urge to turn away. "Miss Preston," he said quietly, "I wrote that advertisement because I needed a wife who could see past appearances, who would not judge a man by his circumstances alone. You answered it, and you traveled over 1,000 miles to meet a stranger. That takes more courage than most people have in their entire bodies. Your face tells me you have survived something difficult, and you are still standing. That is exactly the kind of woman I was hoping to meet." Ophelia stared at him, unable to process his words. In all her imaginings of this moment, she had never considered this possibility. "You do not mind the scars." "I mind that you were hurt," Lucas said, and the sincerity in his voice made her eyes sting with unexpected tears. "I mind that people have been cruel to you because of them. But mind them on you. No, Miss Preston, I do not mind them at all." He extended his hand to her, palm up, an offering rather than a demand. "Will you give me a chance to prove that to you?" Ophelia looked at his hand, calloused and strong, the hand of a man who worked hard for his living. Everything in her life had taught her to doubt, to protect herself from hope, because hope only led to greater pain. But something in Lucas Kincaid's eyes, something genuine and raw, made her want to believe. She placed her hand in his. His fingers closed gently around hers, warm and solid, and she felt something shift in her chest, like a door that had been locked for years suddenly creaking open. "Thank you," she whispered. Lucas smiled, and it transformed his entire face, chasing away the wariness and replacing it with something that looked almost like joy. "Let me get your trunks," he said. "The ranch is about 5 miles out of town. I have a wagon waiting." As he hefted her trunks with ease, Ophelia followed him down the street, acutely aware of the curious stares from the townspeople. She had expected that. What she had not expected was the way Lucas positioned himself slightly between her and their gazes, a subtle protection that spoke volumes. The wagon was sturdy if worn, pulled by 2 patient horses that flicked their ears against the flies. Lucas secured her trunks in the back, and then offered his hand to help her up onto the seat. His touch was careful, respectful, and Ophelia found herself studying him from the corner of her eye as he climbed up beside her and took the reins. "Tell me about your ranch," she said as they pulled away from the town, needing to fill the silence with something other than her racing thoughts. Lucas's expression grew more animated as he spoke. "It is not much yet," he admitted. 200 acres along the canyon. I have been building it up for the past 5 years since I was 21. Got about 30 head of cattle right now, some chickens, a good well. The house is small, but it is sound. I built most of it myself." There was pride in his voice, the pride of a man who had created something with his own hands. Ophelia found herself warming to him. "Why did you decide you needed a wife?" she asked, then immediately regretted the bluntness of the question. "I apologize, that was too forward." "No, it is a fair question," Lucas said. He was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the dusty trail ahead. "This country is hard, Miss Preston. It takes everything you have and then asks for more. I have been doing it alone for 5 years, and I am tired of being lonely. I want someone to build something with, someone to share the good days and the hard ones. I want a partner, not just a housekeeper or a cook. I want what my parents had before they died." The honesty in his words struck something deep in Ophelia's chest. "I am sorry about your parents. Fever took them both when I was 19, Lucas said. "That is when I came out here to make a fresh start. What about you? What made you answer my advertisement? Ophelia had known this question would come, but she still had to gather her courage to answer it truthfully. Because I was tired of being invisible, she said quietly. In Boston, I was my aunt's unpaid help, the niece she took in out of Christian duty. I spent my days cooking and cleaning and being grateful for the roof over my head. But I was so lonely, Mr. Kincaid. I watched other women my age fall in love, marry, start families, and I knew I would never have that. The scars, you see. Men would court my cousins, but they would barely look at me. And when they did, it was always with pity or disgust. She stopped, afraid she had said too much, but Lucas was listening intently. When I saw your advertisement, I thought perhaps distance might make a difference, she continued. Perhaps a man out here would need a wife badly enough that he could overlook my appearance. I know that is not a romantic reason, but it is an honest one. I appreciate your honesty, Lucas said. He was quiet for a moment, then added, For what it is worth, Miss Preston, when I look at you, I do not see scars. I see a woman with kind eyes and a brave heart. I see someone who took a risk on a stranger because she wanted more from life. That is worth more than a perfect face. Ophelia felt tears prick her eyes again, and she blinked them back quickly. She was not used to kindness, especially not from men. Thank you, she managed. The landscape around them was stark and beautiful in its own way. Red rock formations jutted up from the earth like ancient monuments, and hardy desert plants clung to life in the sandy soil. The canyon itself was a gash in the earth, deep and shadowed, with a thin ribbon of river at its bottom. It was nothing like the green hills and dense forests of Massachusetts, but there was something compelling about its raw, untamed nature. It is different from what you are used to, Lucas observed, following her gaze. Yes, Ophelia agreed, but not in a bad way. It has its own beauty. Lucas seemed pleased by this response. Water is the challenge here, he explained. The ranch has a good well, like I said, but you have to be careful with every drop. Summers are brutal, and winters can be surprisingly cold. But the cattle do well on the scrub grass, and there is decent grazing up in the higher elevations. He talked about his ranch with the passion of a man who had poured his soul into it, and Ophelia found herself listening not just to his words but to the emotion behind them. Lucas Kincaid was a man who cared deeply about the things he built, the life he was creating. It made her wonder what it would be like to be cared for with that same intensity. The ranch came into view as they crested a rise, and Ophelia caught her breath. It was small, as Lucas had warned, but there was something solid and welcoming about it. The house was a single-story wooden structure with a wide porch, weathered but well-maintained. A barn stood nearby, along with a chicken coop and several corrals. Beyond, she could see cattle grazing on the scrubland, and the canyon wall rose up in the distance like a protective barrier. It is wonderful, Ophelia said, and meant it. Lucas's face lit up with pleasure. You really think so? I do. You have built something real here, Mr. Kincaid. Something lasting. Lucas, he said, if you are going to be my wife, you should call me Lucas. The casual way he said it, as though her becoming his wife was a settled matter rather than a question, sent a flutter through Ophelia's stomach. Then you should call me Ophelia. Ophelia, he repeated, and somehow her name sounded different in his deep voice, almost beautiful. That is a lovely name. He pulled the wagon up to the house and jumped down, then came around to help her descend. His hands on her waist were strong and sure, and he lifted her down as easily as if she weighed nothing. For a moment, they stood very close, and Ophelia could smell the scent of him. Leather and sun, warmed cotton, and something else, something essentially masculine that made her pulse quicken. Lucas seemed to feel it too, because he stepped back quickly, clearing his throat. Let me show you inside. The house was simple but clean, with a main room that served as both kitchen and living area, a separate bedroom, and a small storage room. The furniture was handmade and practical, and everything was neat and organized. It was the home of a man who had been living alone and taking care of himself. "I know it is not fancy," Lucas said, watching her anxiously as she looked around. "It is perfect," Ophelia assured him. "It is more than I had in Boston. There, I shared an attic room with storage trunks and old furniture." Lucas's expression darkened. "Your aunt did not treat you well." "She fed me and gave me shelter," Ophelia said carefully. "That is more than some have." "You deserved more than just the basics," Lucas said firmly. "You deserved to be valued." The words settled into Ophelia's heart like a warm balm on an old wound. She turned away, pretending to examine the cast iron stove, because she did not want him to see how much his words affected her. "I should warn you," Lucas said, his tone lighter now. "I am not much of a cook. I can make coffee strong enough to float a horseshoe and fry up some bacon and beans, but that is about the extent of my skills. I have been looking forward to eating something that does not come out of a can." Ophelia smiled despite herself. "I am a good cook. My aunt made sure of that. I can make just about anything with whatever ingredients are available." "Then we will make a good team," Lucas said. "I will provide the food and you will make it edible." It was such a simple exchange, but it held the promise of partnership, of two people working together toward a common goal. Ophelia had never had that before, and the prospect filled her with tentative hope. "Where would you like me to sleep?" she asked, then felt her cheeks heat at the indelicate question. Lucas's ears reddened. "The bedroom is yours," he said quickly. "I have been sleeping out here on the couch. We can keep that arrangement until we are married proper, and even after if you prefer." "I will not push you into anything you are not ready for, Ophelia. We will go at your pace." The relief that washed over her must have shown on her face, because Lucas smiled gently. "I meant what I said about wanting a partner. Partners respect each other, and that includes respecting boundaries." "Thank you," Ophelia said softly. Then, gathering her courage, she asked, "When were you thinking we should marry?" "Whenever you are ready," Lucas said. "Tomorrow, next month, next year. I will wait as long as you need to be sure about this." Ophelia considered this. Every practical bone in her body said to wait, to be cautious, to protect herself from potential heartbreak. But another part of her, the part that had dared to come west in the first place, whispered that Lucas Kincaid was a good man, a rare man, and that she would be a fool to let fear rule her forever. "I would like to wait a few weeks," she said finally, "to be sure we suit each other. But not too long." Lucas's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "That sounds perfect." Over the following days, they settled into a cautious but comfortable routine. Ophelia woke early to start breakfast while Lucas tended to the animals. They ate together, and then Lucas would head out to work on various ranch tasks while Ophelia tackled the housework. She cleaned the cabin from top to bottom, organized the supplies, and began planning a small garden near the house where she could grow vegetables and herbs. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch as the heat of the day faded and talk. These conversations became Ophelia's favorite part of the day. Lucas was intelligent and thoughtful, with a dry sense of humor that often surprised her into laughter. He asked about her life in Boston, and actually listened to her answers, seeming genuinely interested in her opinions and experiences. In turn, he told her about his childhood in Kansas, about his parents who had been wheat farmers, about the fever that had stolen them both within days of each other. He talked about the grief that had driven him west, looking for a fresh start, and the back-breaking work of building a ranch from nothing. "Some days I was not sure I would make it. he admitted one evening as they watched the sun paint the canyon walls in shades of gold and crimson. "The first winter I nearly froze to death when a blizzard hit, lost half my cattle that year, but I was too stubborn to give up." "I am glad you were stubborn," Ophelia said quietly. Lucas turned to look at her, and something intense flickered in his eyes. "So am I." The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken words, with possibilities neither was quite ready to name. Ophelia felt her heart begin to race, felt the pull of attraction that had been building since the day she arrived. Lucas was a good man, but more than that, he was a man who made her feel seen, valued, desired even. It was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. Lucas seemed to feel it too, because he cleared his throat and looked away, breaking the moment. "I should check on the horses," he said, standing abruptly. Ophelia watched him go, her hands trembling slightly in her lap. She was falling for Lucas Kincaid, falling hard and fast, and the knowledge both thrilled and frightened her. What if he changed his mind? What if he woke up one day and realized he had made a terrible mistake? What if she gave him her heart and he broke it? But as the days passed, Lucas showed no signs of changing his mind. If anything, he seemed more attentive, more determined to prove his feelings were genuine. He brought her wildflowers he found while checking the cattle, awkward and sweet in his offering. He fixed the window in the bedroom that had been sticking, just because she had mentioned it once. He taught her to ride his gentlest horse, patient and encouraging even when she was nervous. 2 weeks after her arrival, Lucas took her into town for supplies. The trip gave Ophelia her first real interaction with the people of Eldorado Canyon, and she steeled herself for the stares and whispers she knew would come. They did come, but Lucas handled them with a quiet confidence that both surprised and moved her. When Mrs. Henderson at the general store let her gaze linger too long on Ophelia's scars, Lucas simply said, "Mrs. Henderson, this is my fiancée, Ophelia Preston. She will be my wife soon, and I would appreciate it if you would treat her with the respect she deserves." Mrs. Henderson flushed and stammered an apology, and after that, her manner was nothing but polite. When they encountered Reverend Thomas on the street, Lucas introduced Ophelia with obvious pride. "Reverend, we will be needing your services in about 2 weeks. I would like you to marry us." The Reverend, a kindly man with white hair and warm brown eyes, smiled broadly. "It would be my honor, Lucas. Miss Preston, welcome to Eldorado Canyon. We are glad to have you." His sincerity seemed genuine, and Ophelia felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. As they loaded supplies into the wagon, a young woman approached them. She was pretty, with blonde curls and a pink calico dress, and she looked at Lucas with obvious affection. "Lucas," she said, her voice pitched high and sweet. "I heard you had sent for a mail-order bride. I had hoped the rumors were not true." Lucas's expression cooled. "Good afternoon, Sarah." "Yes, the rumors are true. This is Ophelia Preston, my fiancée." Sarah's blue eyes swept over Ophelia, and her expression shifted from hope to barely concealed disdain. "Oh," she said, her tone making it clear what she thought of what she saw. "How nice for you, Lucas. I am sure you will be very happy together." The words were polite, but the contempt beneath them was obvious. Ophelia felt her face heat with shame and anger. "We will be," Lucas said, his voice hard. "Ophelia is everything I could have hoped for. Now if you will excuse us, we have work to do." He took Ophelia's elbow and guided her firmly toward the wagon, leaving Sarah staring after them with a pinched expression. Once they were out of town, Ophelia let out a shaky breath. "Who was that?" "Sarah Mitchell," Lucas said, his jaw tight. "Her father owns the biggest ranch in the area. She has been trying to get me to court her for the past 3 years, and she does not take rejection well." "She is very pretty," Ophelia said quietly. Lucas pulled the wagon to a stop and turned to face her fully. "Ophelia, look at me," she did reluctantly. "Sarah Mitchell is pretty on the outside," Lucas said, his storm-gray eyes intense. "But she is mean-spirited and spoiled, and she treats people she considers beneath her like dirt. I would rather live alone for the rest of my life than spend a single day married to someone like that. You, on the other hand, are beautiful inside and out, and any man who cannot see that is a fool." Ophelia felt tears sting her eyes. "You really mean that?" "Every word," Lucas said firmly. He reached out and gently touched her cheek, his fingers tracing the edge of her scars with infinite tenderness. "These do not define you, Ophelia. They are just a part of your story, and your story is one of survival and courage. That is beautiful to me." Unable to help herself, Ophelia leaned into his touch, and Lucas made a sound low in his throat. "Ophelia," he said, his voice rough. "May I kiss you?" Her heart hammered against her ribs. No man had ever asked to kiss her before. No man had ever wanted to. "Yes," she whispered. Lucas leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to change her mind, and then his lips were on hers, warm and gentle and perfect. The kiss was chaste, respectful, but it still sent electricity racing through Ophelia's veins. When Lucas pulled back, his eyes were dark with emotion. "I am falling in love with you," he said, the words raw and honest. "I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a few weeks, but I cannot help it. You are everything I did not know I needed." Ophelia's breath caught. "I am falling in love with you too," she admitted. "It terrifies me, but I cannot seem to stop." Lucas smiled, and it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "Then let us be terrified together." He kissed her again, longer this time, deeper, and Ophelia felt the last of her defenses crumble. She was his, completely and irrevocably, and for the first time in her life, that did not feel like a weakness. It felt like strength. The 2 weeks until the wedding passed in a blur of preparation and growing anticipation. Ophelia sewed a new dress for the ceremony, a simple but elegant creation in cream-colored muslin that she hoped would make her look like a proper bride. Lucas worked himself nearly to exhaustion fixing up the house, building new furniture, and generally trying to make everything perfect for their life together. The night before the wedding, they sat on the porch as usual, but the air between them crackled with awareness and nervous excitement. "Are you having second thoughts?" Lucas asked quietly. "No," Ophelia said immediately. "Are you?" "Not even for a moment." He took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "I just want you to be happy, Ophelia. That is all I want." "I am happy," she said, and realized with a start that it was true. For the first time in her adult life, she was genuinely, deeply happy. "You make me happy, Lucas." He raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, his eyes never leaving hers. "Good. I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure you stay that way." The wedding took place in the small church in Eldorado Canyon on a bright August morning. The ceremony was simple, with only a handful of townspeople in attendance, but to Ophelia it was perfect. She wore her new cream dress and carried a bouquet of wildflowers Lucas had gathered that morning. He wore his best clothes, his dark hair slicked back, his eyes filled with such love and devotion that Ophelia felt her heart might burst. When Reverend Thomas pronounced them man and wife, and Lucas kissed her in front of God and everyone, Ophelia felt as though she had finally come home. She was no longer the scarred, unwanted spinster from Boston. She was Ophelia Kincaid, beloved wife of a good man, and she had a future stretching before her filled with possibility. The wedding breakfast was held at the general store, with Mrs. Henderson providing sandwiches and cake. The townspeople were friendly and welcoming, and if some of them still stared at Ophelia's scars, she found she cared less than she once had. Lucas stayed close to her side the entire time, his pride in her evident in every look and touch. When they finally returned to the ranch in the afternoon, Lucas carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing at the absurdity and sweetness of the gesture. He set her down gently in the main room, and suddenly the laughter faded, replaced by something more serious, more intense. "Ophelia," Lucas said, his voice low. "I know I said we would go at your pace, and I meant it. If you need more time before we are truly husband and wife, I will wait. I will wait as long as you need." Ophelia looked at this man who had given her back her faith in love, in herself, and felt desire curl hot and insistent in her belly. "I do not want to wait," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I want to be your wife in every way, Lucas. I want you." The storm in his eyes turned dark and wild, and then he was kissing her, deep and hungry and full of barely restrained passion. Ophelia kissed him back with equal fervor, her hands tangling in his hair, her body pressing against his. She had waited so long to be wanted, to be desired, and now that it was finally happening, she wanted to drown in it. Lucas lifted her in his arms and carried her to the bedroom, laying her gently on the bed he had built with his own hands. "You are so beautiful," he murmured against her skin as he began to unfasten her dress. "So perfect." "I am scarred," she whispered, old insecurities rising despite everything. "You are perfect," he repeated firmly, and then he proceeded to show her with his hands and mouth and body just how much he meant it. Their coming together was tender and passionate, awkward in places as all first times are, but also profound and deeply moving. Lucas was gentle with her, patient, taking his time to ensure her pleasure before seeking his own. And when they finally joined as one, Ophelia felt tears slip down her cheeks, overwhelmed by the intimacy of it, by the sheer rightness of being with this man. Afterward they lay tangled together in the sheets, Lucas's arms wrapped protectively around her. He pressed kisses to her hair, her temple, her scarred cheek, each touch a benediction. "I love you," he said. "I love you so much, Ophelia." "I love you too," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. "More than I ever thought possible." They fell asleep that way, wrapped in each other, and Ophelia's last thought before sleep claimed her was that she had finally found where she belonged. The months that followed were the happiest of Ophelia's life. She and Lucas settled into married life with an ease that surprised them both. The work was hard, the days long, but they faced it together, and that made all the difference. Ophelia threw herself into making the ranch a true home. She planted her garden and was delighted when vegetables began to sprout. She learned to milk the cow Lucas bought, and to gather eggs from the chickens without getting pecked. She cooked hearty meals that kept Lucas fueled for his demanding work, and she kept the house clean and welcoming. But more than the practical tasks, she found joy in the small moments of intimacy that married life brought. The way Lucas would come in from the fields and immediately seek her out for a kiss. The way he would pull her into his lap in the evenings while they talked about their day. The way he reached for her in the night, needing the comfort and connection of her body against his. They made love frequently, with a passion that never seemed to diminish. Lucas was an attentive and creative lover, always concerned with her pleasure, and Ophelia bloomed under his attention. She grew more confident in her own skin, more comfortable expressing her desires. The scars that had once defined her now felt like just another part of who she was, neither hidden nor emphasized, simply there. As autumn arrived and the brutal summer heat began to ease, Lucas surprised her one evening by presenting her with a beautiful chestnut mare. "She is for you," he said, grinning at her shocked expression. "I know you have been practicing on old Ben, but he is too slow for riding out to check the herd with me. This is Ginger, and she is gentle but spirited. I thought you might like to start riding with me sometimes." Ophelia threw her arms around his neck, overcome with joy. The mare was a generous and thoughtful gift, but more than that, it was Lucas including her in his work, treating her as the partner he had promised she would be. They began riding out together several times a week, and Ophelia fell in love with the vast Nevada landscape all over again. From horseback, she could see the true scope of Lucas's ranch, could understand the challenges and possibilities in a way she never had before. She also proved to have a good eye for cattle, spotting potential problems with the herd that Lucas sometimes missed. "You are a natural rancher," he told her one day, his voice filled with admiration. "I knew you would be good at this." Winter came, bringing with it cold nights and occasional snow. Lucas had been right about the winters being surprisingly harsh, but Ophelia found she did not mind. The house was snug and warm, and there was something deeply satisfying about weathering the storms in Lucas's arms. It was during that first winter that Ophelia realized she was pregnant. She had missed her monthly courses twice, and there were other signs: tender breasts, occasional nausea in the mornings, a bone-deep fatigue that no amount of sleep seemed to cure. The realization filled her with equal parts joy and terror. She waited until she was certain before telling Lucas. One evening in late January, as they sat by the fire after supper, she gathered her courage. "Lucas," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I have something to tell you." He looked up from the piece of leather he had been mending, his expression immediately concerned. "What is wrong?" "Are you ill?" "No, not ill," Ophelia said quickly. "At least, not in a bad way. Lucas, I am pregnant. We are going to have a baby." For a moment, Lucas simply stared at her, his face blank with shock. Then a slow, wondering smile spread across his features. "A baby," he repeated. "We are going to have a baby," Ophelia nodded, tears springing to her eyes at the sheer joy in his expression. Lucas whooped with delight and swept her up in his arms, spinning her around the small room until she was breathless and laughing. When he finally set her down, he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her with such tenderness that her heart ached. "A baby," he said again, as though he could not quite believe it. "Ophelia, you have made me the happiest man alive." "You are not worried?" she asked, voicing her own fears. "About the cost, or the extra work, or what if something goes wrong?" "Of course I am worried," Lucas admitted. "I am terrified, if I am being honest, but I am also so excited I can barely breathe. We are going to be parents, Ophelia. We are going to have a family." His joy was infectious, and Ophelia felt her own fears ease. They would face this challenge like they faced everything else, together. The winter passed slowly as they prepared for the baby's arrival. Lucas built a beautiful cradle from smooth pine wood, carving delicate designs into the sides. Ophelia sewed tiny clothes and blankets, marveling at how small everything was. They talked endlessly about names, about what kind of parents they wanted to be, about the future they were building for their child. Spring arrived with a burst of wildflowers, and Ophelia's belly swelled with new life. She felt ungainly and uncomfortable, but Lucas never stopped telling her how beautiful she was, how much he loved the sight of her carrying his child. His devotion never wavered, even when she was cranky from lack of sleep or frustrated by her physical limitations. The baby came in early June, arriving after a long and difficult labor that left Ophelia exhausted but triumphant. Lucas stayed by her side through it all, holding her hand, wiping her brow, murmuring encouragement even when she cursed him for getting her into this situation in the first place. When the midwife from town finally placed a squalling, red-faced infant in Ophelia's arms, she burst into tears. "A boy," the midwife announced. "A healthy baby boy." Lucas looked down at his son with such awe and love that Ophelia fell in love with him all over again. "He is perfect," Lucas whispered, touching one tiny fist with a gentle finger. "He is absolutely perfect." They named him James Lucas Kincaid after both of their fathers, and he became the center of their world. Lucas proved to be a devoted and hands-on father, changing diapers without complaint and walking the floor with James when he fussed at night. He would sit for hours just watching his son sleep, his expression soft with wonder. "I never knew I could love anyone this much," he told Ophelia one night as they stood over the cradle together. "I love you more than life itself, and now I love him the same way. It is almost frightening how much I love you both." "I know," Ophelia said, leaning into his embrace. "I feel the same way." Life settled into a new rhythm, busier and more chaotic but also richer. James was a good baby, generally happy and healthy, and Ophelia found that motherhood came more naturally to her than she had expected. She loved nursing her son, loved the quiet moments in the rocking chair when it was just the two of them. She loved watching Lucas with James, seeing her strong, capable husband reduced to silly faces and baby talk. As James grew from infant to toddler, the ranch continued to prosper. Lucas expanded the herd, adding 30 more head of cattle. The garden Ophelia tended provided most of their vegetables, and she began raising chickens in larger numbers, selling eggs in town for extra income. They were not wealthy by any means, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. When James was 2 years old, Ophelia discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the news was met with excitement rather than trepidation. They knew what to expect now, knew they could handle whatever challenges came their way. Their daughter arrived the following spring, a tiny thing with dark hair and her father's storm-gray eyes. They named her Lily Margaret, after Lucas's mother and Ophelia's aunt. Lucas was completely smitten with his daughter, and Ophelia often caught him just staring at her in wonder. "I have a daughter," he would say, shaking his head as though he could not quite believe it. "I have a beautiful daughter." James adored his baby sister, wanting to help with everything from feeding to diaper changes. Watching her 2 children together, watching Lucas with both of them, Ophelia often had to pinch herself to believe this was really her life. The years passed in a blur of hard work and simple joys. James grew into a sturdy, good-natured boy who followed his father everywhere, learning the ways of ranching. Lily proved to be as spirited as her mother and as stubborn as her father, a combination that kept them all on their toes. They had 2 more children in the following years, another boy named Samuel, and finally a girl they called Rose. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. Lucas hired a few hands to help with the expanded herd, and they built a larger barn and additional corrals. Ophelia's garden became the envy of the county, and she often supplied vegetables to the general store in town. They were respected members of the community, their children were healthy and happy, and their love for each other only deepened with time. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Lucas surprised Ophelia by taking her on a picnic to the spot where he had first kissed her, overlooking the canyon. The children were left with a neighbor for the afternoon, and it was just the 2 of them, like it had been in the beginning. "Do you ever regret it?" Ophelia asked as they sat on a blanket, watching the sun paint the canyon walls gold. Sending for a mail-order bride instead of courting someone local, Lucas turned to her with such genuine surprise that she knew his answer before he spoke. "Regret it. Ophelia, marrying you was the best decision I ever made. You gave me everything I ever wanted and so much more. You gave me love, a family, a true partner. How could I possibly regret that, even though I came with scars?" she asked, voicing the old insecurity that sometimes still surfaced. Lucas took her face in his hands, his touch gentle but his eyes intense. "Listen to me," he said. "I have never, not for one single moment, regretted your scars. They are part of you, part of your story, and I love every part of you. But more than that, I want you to stop thinking of them as something negative. Those scars are proof that you survived, that you are strong. That is beautiful to me." Ophelia felt tears slip down her cheeks, but they were good tears, healing tears. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you so much." Lucas Kincaid. "I love you too, Ophelia Kincaid," he replied, and kissed her with all the passion and devotion of their wedding day. As they rode back to the ranch that evening, Ophelia reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had come to Nevada expecting rejection, expecting to confirm what she had always been told, that no man would ever want her. Instead, she had found Lucas, a man who wanted her more than anything, who saw past her scars to the woman beneath, who loved her with a fierce and unwavering devotion. She had found a home, a family, a purpose. She had found herself. The children were waiting on the porch when they arrived, James and Lily playing a game while Samuel toddled after them and baby Rose napped in her basket. The house Lucas had built with his own hands stood solid and welcoming, the barn beyond it sheltering the animals that were their livelihood. The land stretched out in all directions, harsh and beautiful, the land they had built a life on together. Lucas helped her down from Ginger, and his hands lingered on her waist as they always did, his eyes warm with love. "Welcome home," he said softly. "I am home," Ophelia replied, and knew it was true in every sense of the word. The years continued to roll by, each one bringing its own challenges and joys. There were droughts that tested their resilience, winters that were brutal, cattle that were lost to disease or predators. But there were also abundant harvests, healthy calves born in the spring, new friendships formed in town, and the constant, steady love between Ophelia and Lucas that formed the foundation of everything. James grew into a fine young man, tall and broad-shouldered like his father, with his mother's kind eyes. He took over more and more of the ranch work as Lucas began to feel his age, and he did so with competence and pride. Lily became a skilled horsewoman, able to ride as well as any of the ranch hands, and she helped her mother expand the garden into a true farm, selling produce throughout the county. Samuel showed an aptitude for numbers and began managing the ranch's finances, while little Rose, the baby of the family, charmed everyone she met with her sunny disposition. When James announced his intention to marry a local girl named Emma Foster, Ophelia and Lucas could not have been more pleased. Emma was a sweet, hard-working young woman who clearly adored their son, and watching them together reminded Ophelia of her own early days with Lucas. The wedding was held at the ranch, with the whole community invited. As Ophelia watched her eldest son pledge his life to the woman he loved, she felt Lucas's hand find hers. She looked up at her husband, now in his early 50s with silver threading through his dark hair, and saw her own emotions reflected in his eyes. "We did good," he whispered to her. "We did," she agreed. More grandchildren followed over the years. James and Emma had 3 children in quick succession, and they built a house on the far corner of the ranch property, expanding the family legacy. Lily eventually married a cowboy from a neighboring ranch, a good man who treated her like the treasure she was. Samuel found love with the schoolteacher who came to Eldorado Canyon, a clever woman who appreciated his quiet intelligence. Even Rose, their baby, grew up and fell in love with the blacksmith's son, a gentle giant of a man who worshipped the ground she walked on. Through it all, Lucas and Ophelia remained the heart of the family. Their love story became legend in Eldorado Canyon, a testament to the power of looking beyond surface appearances to the person within. Young couples would sometimes ride out to the ranch to ask their advice on marriage, and Ophelia and Lucas always gave the same counsel. Respect each other, work together, never go to bed angry, and remember that love is a choice you make every single day. On their 30th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. There were dozens of people crowded into the house and spilling out onto the porch. Children, grandchildren, friends, neighbors. Tables groaned under the weight of food, and there was music and dancing and laughter. As the sun began to set, painting the canyon in shades of gold and crimson just as it had done for the past 3 decades, Lucas pulled Ophelia aside. They walked together to their favorite spot, the place where they had shared their first kiss, where he had told her he was falling in love with her. 30 years, Lucas said, shaking his head in wonder. 30 years since you stepped off that train, scared and brave and beautiful, and changed my life forever. 30 years since you looked at me and saw not my scars but my heart, Ophelia replied. 30 years since you taught me what it means to be truly loved. Lucas pulled her into his arms and she went willingly, resting her head against his chest. His heartbeat was steady and strong beneath her ear, the same heart that had loved her faithfully for 3 decades. I would do it all again, he said quietly. Every moment, every challenge, every joy. I would choose you every single time, Ophelia. And I would choose you, she replied. Always. They stood there as the sun sank below the horizon, 2 people who had found in each other exactly what they needed when they needed it most. The mail-order bride who had been told no man would want her, and the cowboy who had wanted her more than anything. Their love had built an empire, not of wealth or fame, but of family and legacy and belonging. It had proven that the deepest beauty lies not in perfection, but in the courage to be vulnerable, to take risks, to believe that you are worthy of love even when the world tells you otherwise. As darkness fell, and they walked hand in hand back to the house full of the family they had created together, Ophelia Kincaid knew with absolute certainty that she had found her happily ever after. Not because her life had been perfect or easy, but because she had found a man who loved her perfectly and completely, scars and all. And that, she thought as Lucas squeezed her hand and smiled down at her with those storm-gray eyes still full of love and wonder, was all any woman could ever ask for. The celebration continued into the night, with music and storytelling, and the kind of joy that comes from being surrounded by people you love. Ophelia moved through the crowd, accepting hugs and well wishes, marveling at how full her life had become. She thought of the lonely, scarred young woman who had stepped off the train in Eldorado Canyon all those years ago, and she wished she could go back and tell that woman that everything would be all right, that her story was just beginning. But perhaps that young woman already knew, Ophelia reflected. Perhaps the very act of answering that advertisement, of boarding that train and traveling over 1,000 miles to meet a stranger, had been the young Ophelia's way of declaring that she refused to accept the limitations others placed on her. She had dared to hope, and that hope had been rewarded beyond her wildest dreams. As the night wore on and guests began to depart, the family helped clean up and settle the children. James and Emma took their brood home, promising to return the next day. Lily and her husband headed back to their ranch, while Samuel and the schoolteacher retreated to their small house in town. Rose and her husband would stay the night in Rose's old room, a tradition they maintained whenever they visited. Finally, it was just Lucas and Ophelia again, sitting on their porch in the cool night air. The stars spread out above them in a vast canopy, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. Tired, Lucas asked, his arm around her shoulders. Pleasantly so, Ophelia replied. It was a wonderful celebration. It was, he agreed. Though I am glad for the quiet now, I love our family, but I also love having you to myself. Ophelia smiled and snuggled closer. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, content just to be together. Do you ever think about what our lives would have been like if we had never met? Ophelia asked eventually. Lucas considered this. Sometimes, he admitted. I think I would have eventually given up on finding someone and resigned myself to being alone. The ranch would have been successful, perhaps, but empty. Just a place I worked, not a home. What about you? I think I would have stayed in Boston, growing old and bitter in my aunt's boarding house, Ophelia said honestly. I would have convinced myself I was content, that I did not need love or companionship. But I would have been lying to myself. I would have been miserable. Then I am glad neither of us had to live that life, Lucas said. He turned to look at her, his expression serious. You saved me, Ophelia. You gave me a reason to build something lasting, a reason to be the best man I could be. You made me want to be worthy of you. You were always worthy, Ophelia said softly. You were the one who saved me, Lucas. You saw me when I had spent so long being invisible. You made me believe I deserved love and happiness. You gave me everything I ever wanted and so much more. They kissed then, a sweet, lingering kiss that held 30 years of love and devotion. When they finally pulled apart, both had tears in their eyes. Come on, Lucas said, standing and offering her his hand. Let us go to bed. Tomorrow is another day, and I want to spend every moment of it with you. Ophelia took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. They walked inside together, closing the door on the night but not on their story. Because their story was not over, not yet. There were still years ahead, still moments to be shared, still love to be given and received. As Ophelia settled into bed beside her husband, feeling his arms come around her in the darkness, she sent up a silent prayer of gratitude. Gratitude for the courage that had brought her west, for the man who had chosen to love her, for the life they had built together against all odds. She had been told no man would want her, but Lucas Kincaid had wanted her more than anything. And in the end, that had made all the difference.